Hey guys.
Hello.
Hey Brian. Hey Helia.
Hi, Palm.
Hey Jeff. Hey Boone.
Hey Brian. I'm doing okay, and
Same old, same old.
you? Yeah,
Always busy nowadays.
yeah.
We can probably get started. Um, all
Yeah, sounds good. Let me ping Ron on the side.
right.
But let's get it started.
Okay. All right. So, there's two big things that we've been working on, right? Is the um, editing the existing TLL spec and for integration with the control path, and the still discussing packet formats and stuff like that for the link layer mapping to UCIe. Um, on the um, on the spec side, in terms of discussions, I think the next thing on the docket would be definitions, because there are quite a few that are not covered right now, and I haven't had a chance to really fill them in yet. And I think there's potentially some vocabulary changes that some people have mentioned that might be desired when we're editing the spec here. And then on the link layer side, I think we were waiting for Ventana to give us the a proposal or at least some lessons learned, if not the proposal, from when they did some similar activity. Jeff, do you have any update on the Ventana side?
We're still working on our contribution, so I will, I'm trying to pull that release together. I don't know exactly when, we'll have that all ready to send out to the group, but
Okay.
hopefully the next
Do,
few.
do you know how big, is it like a big document that you're trying to do, or is this something like what is the scope of the deliverable you guys are talking about donating?
It's not a huge document, but it's roughly around, I think, 10 to 20 pages or so. So,
Okay.
yeah, I just need to go through it with David and work on some other aspects of releasing it, getting
Okay.
approval to release it.
Well, I think we're kind of on hold for the UCIe mapping until that happens, because I don't think we want to go off on a discussion tangent on that particular topic if it's just going to get retracted later.
Yeah.
Um, or if you guys have, something that'll be helpful too is again, if you think you're actually going to be donating this, if you have topics from your side that you guys don't cover in the document that we can talk about, that would be helpful as well. And then we can try and fill in gaps before we see what you guys have. And then, depending on what that is, maybe we retcon some of that, but either way, um,
Yeah, I think currently the document is purely focused on the raw format. So what you were doing with the 256 byte low latency flit would be in addition to what we've got current.
okay. I think the only, so on the flit specifically, I think there's two pieces. Number one, the new link layer format and how that maps to the flit, right? Which is one piece. And then the other piece would be things like byte order and all the other bits for the physical for uh, the die-to-die adapter mapping. And I expected to kind of follow the conventions of whatever you're doing for those pieces. Maybe we
Okay.
retarget a little bit, but I don't want to like change byte orders or something like that. So um, so yeah, so I still even with that one, I think we're kind of on hold until we see that as well, because I think we have, unless again other people have proposals against what I showed earlier. Um, I haven't thought of anything better on what I've already done there.
Yeah, and I'm also working, for David to give you feedback on your proposal. He's
Okay, yeah, that would be very
fairly
helpful as
written.
well.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So I don't here. So in order, so let's talk about the other topic then. And like I said, I haven't had a chance to make proposals here um, on the uh, on the
Um,
definitions that are in the link layer document.
Sorry, Brian, just on the other topic, in on the side channel, we also talked about timing.
Right.
So do you want to share that as well?
Well, I mean, we have these two potential things that we're integrating. And so the question from Anu was, what can we get done before the global summit? The global summit is happening in October. Um, I think the control path integration is definitely doable by then. And maybe we incorporate some other document edits into the link layer doc at the same time to kind of prepare it for other things. But I think that's easy to commit to. Um, Halia, you offered to help me do some editing there. So between the two of us, we're probably done in, a handful of weeks. hopefully before I turn into a pumpkin this summer. And then, but I think any of the other stuff, especially in the link layer side, sans review of what Jeff has said, it's kind of hard to commit to anything else before then. So this may end up being just 2 separate document releases, which I think is what we had originally thought before. Though I will say that October is reasonably far away, so it is possible that even if it is 2 document releases, we have the second one done before October. I think that really depends on how much feedback we get from the initial proposal and what we decide our gaps are.
Thank
Does
you.
that all
Yep.
that all make sense?
Yep.
Is everybody in agreement with that?
Well,
Or do we have like a super rush to get out the link layer side?
yeah, I guess my comments were that we were setting Global Summit as kind of the target to try to get this new activity, right? The binding to UCIe in the specification, and maybe some work done on the profiles and variants. Maybe
Yeah,
that's
I think
aggressive.
it's doable, but I think it's just kind of hard to commit to that right now, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah. And so just given that, kind of felt that was pretty far out, we didn't, I guess the idea was that this was going to gate getting the control path in if you wanted
Right.
to do that, yeah, and released.
Yeah, they're really not related at all. In fact, they're somewhat orthogonal, given that they are you don't use the control path when you see UCIe, because UCIe has its own control path.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so I've shared the definitions here, and again, we don't need to run through all of these necessarily, but maybe we can talk a little bit. Uh, David had quite a few. There's a number of fix me's in the document, which I don't know why we didn't make a concerted effort to just take those out before we released it. But whatever. But we do also have a whole bunch of definitions that just are blank. And so this is probably something we should fix even with the control path release. And there are, as we kind of discussed when we are making the separate control path document, there are different definitions for the same words. And so, and even when drilling into even if you caveat these things and say, okay, well, there's these are different instances or whatever of the same type of terminology, there's still differences. So I'm not 100% sure on how to handle this, which is why I'm kind of bringing it up here rather than just filling in a bunch of definitions. And so maybe we can talk through a little bit of that. So the first one that we talked about already, and we don't really have a solution for, is the word link. So in the BOW spec, we define link as a connection between 2 sets of phi's, one TX, one RX. So it's one direction. And in the control path spec, because it is mainly dealing with the control and states of said link, we use the same definition. But where I could, I disambiguated this and called it a main band link, versus sideband link, because we also have that. Because sideband links there's no sideband link in the BOW specification, but there's sets of sideband channels. And regardless of what the main band is doing, sideband is always bidirectional. Excuse me 1 second. I don't know why mute button went to. Where did I go? Oh, stupid Zoom. All right, anyway, so sideband's always bidirectional. Main band of the BOW spec is unidirectional. And so because we're controlling a unidirectional main band link in the sideband control path specification, main band, the link is also unidirectional. Now, for the transaction and link layer spec, it's not about, just data transport. It's about it's about protocol transport, right? And so all the protocols are bidirectional. That's not true. Well, yeah, okay. They're all bidirectional because they all have flow control of some sort, right? I think even the unidirectional buses have some sort of valid signal or something like that. So there's always some sort of bidirectional element. And so all of the definition for link here is really two sets of TX and RX, right? Is that right? I mean, well, anyway, the definition there is a little fuzzy. The way it's used is definitely bidirectional. And so this probably needs to be disambiguated between the two. For the control path spec, when we're editing it in, Helge and I can make a scrub of that, and I think change the terminology and make sure the terminology that I started with main band link can be followed, right? So that, or maybe we can call it, maybe there's a different name for that. Maybe we call it a bow link or something like that. And then, but I think there's an open question about what do we do with this version of link? Do we just keep it as it is and how it's used in the document? Or do we come up with new terminology and make sure that that's propagated specifically for protocol transport? One sec. Because they, other standards like UCIe or whatever, they get around this by not calling them links. They call them, you know, uh, protocol layers or whatever the case may be, right? They just kind of avoid that term. Where we are kind of overloading a term for data transport to mean different transport in the stack, different levels of the protocol. So I guess that's the first thing in terms of terminology. That was the first thing on my mind. Do we need to do something in terms of how we define things like link? Okay. I think our first step either way is the same: disambiguating and control path, or just to double check control path as we're integrating to make sure that it is fully disambiguated. So it's clear that we're talking about something different. But if people want to think about like whether there is a better way to refer to the link that we talk about in the transaction link layer, where it's really a protocol link or a bidirectional protocol using multiple BOW links. And maybe that's the only thing I need to, well, no. I think if I'm gonna call one a BOW link, or a main band link or whatever, I do need to call the transaction link layer some other kind of link. and then redefine link to be even more general than I have it here, or something like that. Though I do not have a good name at the moment.
With what you explained, it was very clear. And with that, do we need to define link as a standalone thing, or main band link, control path link? And I like if we don't call the transport layer not a link.
So the document calls the transport layer a link right now. Though I haven't gone through all the instances and figured out if each one, how all of them are used, right? So, and maybe it's not that big of a hurdle it's not, I don't think, it's probably not that big of a hurdle in terms of just rephrasing the sentences a little bit. The only question would be whether if we call the BOW definition of link a separate thing and then define the link in the document to be two of the BOW links or main band links or whatever the case we call it. Is that sufficient, right? And I think I think it's still an open question in the document itself, right? Because it's probably a sentence by sentence basis. I think my question right now is that if we do run into a problem there, or if people do even with that still find it confusing, what would we call what would we call a link in the transaction in the link layer, use of the terminology link? What would we call that?
For the transport layer or transaction layer?
Well, the transaction layer, well, no, well, there's a transaction layer and a link layer, right? And that link layer, I think, is the real heart of the issue, right? It is the protocol by which you take a stream of bytes and stream it across the link, right? Or stream it across the link, yeah. Stream it across the bow files, right? And so, it has credit returns and things like that, right? That's the quote unquote link in this context.
And that's the unidirectional.
That's bidirectional, right? Because it has to have credit returns and stuff. And so even if the data stream is unidirectional, the protocol is bidirectional and requires a bidirectional set of files. But a BOW link does not. And a main band link as defined in the sideband specification also does not, right? Because you can find a unidirectional main band and a bidirectional sideband, which is the default if you look at the BOW spec. And the sideband protocol should work even in that instance.
So the concern you're raising is that the physical connection between PHYs we've kind of referred to as a link.
Both the physical connection and the data transport is the link. It's used in two places. The physical connection,
yeah.
The relationship of TX and RX, that's one link in the BOW spec, and the protocol that you run on top of it that is bidirectional, requiring two sets of PHYs, is also called a link. It's the link layer, right? And again, I haven't really scoped out like how many places this needs to change or whatever, but I just didn't know if people had an idea for a better name for that. And I mean, you can throw a whole bunch of names out there in terms of, a brainstorming. You call it a data transport link or a protocol link or whatever. That's anyway. And we don't have to answer this question right now, but because I think, like I said, the initial work on this document is the same, regardless, because we do have to disambiguate the parts we're integrating. The question then becomes, do we need to do something to them, the initial one? And so I'll go, before we talk about this subject again, maybe I'll pull out some sentences and stuff like that, and maybe we can do that on a case by case, just to make sure there's no confusion. But if people have names or people have ideas on ways we can make this easier, then I will, gladly accept whatever suggestions you guys have.
Brian, I think we looked at that from another angle in the past, and I think Paul brought this up. That
Yeah.
I think now with your definition, we can look at them as two separate things. Like,
Yeah. I mean, the other option here is to keep, I think, again, Paul's point originally was this was broken, right? And between bow and link layer. And I think the takeaway at the time was just to define it like bow does in our control path, right? When control path was a separate document. And so that's fine. right? We did that. But the problem is now because we're having to integrate it with this document has different things which are broken, different definitions. The other way here to do is to keep the same definition of link in all places and just edit this document in all places that it refers to it and use the bow definition, right? Where, whenever it talks about just a link, right, we say it takes a pair of links, things like that. So, or it takes a, or well, again, either that or we define a new term, something of that nature. There's a couple of ways we can handle this. But we did already discuss this, but the discussion was in terms of our other specification
Yes.
or standalone.
Yeah, it seems this is kind of would resolve that. So okay.
Well, we already resolved it. Now we have to resolve it again, is my point.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right. So the next topic in terms of larger definition discussions would be the first one of the first ones on this list. So there is some confusion in some of the discussions on the difference between a bus protocol variant and a profile and stuff like that. And we do describe it in the text. I do realize now that they're not, for some reason, we didn't take those definitions from the text and also put them into the definition scope, but a definition list, but whatever. Well, I can fix that part. But the question is whether the terminology of bus protocol variant and the terminology of profile is still whether that actually needs to be revisited or not. Whether with something else we can do in terms of education in order to make that more clear. We can go down to see that. So we have a couple of subsections already that talk about these, right? But the short takeaway is bus protocol variants are basically just mappings. It's mappings of a given, it's not mappings. It's a mapping of a wire-based protocol to a packet format, right? It's for transport across the transaction layer, right? And so that's all bus protocol variants are. They're smaller specs that give you a bus mapping, and that's all they give you, right? And then they also potentially can give you all sorts of information, but I don't think any of our bus protocol variants besides the example ones that are in this spec give you a lot of other information, right? They just give you the mapping. Some of the ones here will actually give you a little bit more in terms of credits and things like that, but they're pretty simple in the most part. And then the next thing up is called an interface profile, which takes a set number of bus protocol variants plus any other assumptions and makes a somewhat standardized link between two chips, so that both sides of the chip vendors are discussing and say, well, we both use this definition of interface profile. Maybe that's a name, maybe that's a spec, whatever. But the interface profile is really what you agree on. The bus protocol variants are just shorthand for building profiles, and they are a way for people to describe the differences between potential mappings of the same bus. Because we gave examples of, an AXI bus, and an AXI stream bus and things like that. But on your native system, you may have different widths, or you may have selected different AXI options, and you just need a crazy amount of user bits or something like that, right? Well, you can define a new bus protocol variant and then release that, and then say, okay, we're using this bus protocol variant plus these standardized ones that have already been released in order to build our profile. So rather than having to have 20-page document or a 50-page document documenting your interface profile, it's like 2 pages because it uses existing variants and terminology from the specs in order to build your profile. So that was the reason these are these 2 layout levels of specification that we talk about, and that was the reason that and that was how we envisioned people building profiles. Now, I don't know if anybody else out there has been building profiles. Ventana obviously has their profile, which they talk about in the specification. And then, I authored a number of the bus protocol variants because at the time we were working on something that would potentially be using these. And so I utilized a lot of the stuff that we were, scoping out for that. But we have not, VeriSilicon has not implemented any of these, right? And so I've been a little hesitant to you know, be evangelical in terms of the variants that we wrote. But again, I'm unclear on whether these terms are actually confusing or whether, again, this is just something that it just takes people a second to realize what the definitions are, and this is an education problem. And personally, I'm open to calling these whatever. So if we do think this is a problem, we can call them something else. But I think these layers still make sense.
I think profiles and variants, I don't know if it really conveys, a well understood meaning for what these are.
Okay.
And I guess I'm trying to understand, can we come up with just a simple, name? And I don't know, the layering aspect of this, it almost seems like you want to deal with each protocol independently, and there may be variances of those protocols, but you can always subname them, right? Like you have a 64-bit bus versus a 32-bit bus or something. And
We
then,
do call out like bus widths in
yeah,
the bus variant protocol specs, right? So people can do different versions there, and we give them different names. That's kind of why they're called variants, because you can kind of pick and choose the flavor.
and
But
then the other thought is, just like composability, because it seems like if you've got certain indices or um, IDs that kind of track the different transactions within those profiles or those protocols,
correct. Yeah.
then you somehow can compose it, right, to a multi-protocol type in situation, which is what
Yeah, I think that's the default that we're assuming because this is SoC disaggregation focused.
yeah.
Uh, I mean, even in our base profile that you guys did, it's chai plus AXI light, right? So even on our smallest form, it'll probably be 2. Though, if people were just doing chai C2C, again, again, even if I was doing chai C2C, I would also prefer to have another protocol there for sideband information and bus and chip management. So I think the vast majority of the industry will be multi-protocol. So it is definitely good that we are as friendly to that as possible. And I think some of the disaggregation discussions that we've had either in both in the group and otherwise, we've talked about use cases where you'll have half a dozen different types of buses being pushed across the link. If you're trying to do a in a variety of cases, because of the way that SoC IPs are not architected for chiplets, right? You end up with lots of situations where you have bunches of different types of protocols, or you end up with a bunch of instances where it makes sense to have multiple instances of the same protocol too. And so being as friendly to this as possible is a win for this standard, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think the number of protocols depends on whether you're on a spoke versus, let's say, a hub, right? A hub might want to be more universal and support, more protocols,
True.
not concurrently, right? But have the ability to boot config into, some
I,
subset.
I would almost say that's a different profile, though. Like you discuss with your chip vendor and say, we support 3 different profiles. And then you select that profile as a boot config, not a protocols. Because the set of bus protocols that you're doing is called an interface profile in this situation.
Mhm.
So maybe again, if you're talking about something like a coherent CPU, it's one of your coherent buses plus a management bus. And then if you're talking about uh, did you use that profile versus if you're doing something where it's a more complicated accelerator that has, um, a variety of data streams, right? Maybe you also have to have infrastructure disambiguation. So you have AXI stream and you have two different data paths, for coherent and non-coherent and whatever. And so again, yeah, I think that grouping, I think it would still be called a profile in that situation. But I completely agree, though, Jeff. From a controller specification, from a controller point of view, it probably doesn't matter. You would potentially be supporting a whole lot more um, types of buses being able to be packetized into that system. Um, yeah, though we don't have any, we don't have any way of doing that discovery or anything. It's still, it's still extra sideband, as you were, information. So, okay, so Jeff,
Well,
so what would,
I'm just wondering if we have to really document the multi-protocol mix, or can we document the profiles of each protocol that is in the potential mix, right? And then the rest of it is just more dynamic mixing of those specifications. You know what I'm saying? Because
yes, I
yeah,
think that would be, I think that requires more protocol itself, though. I mean, like you're saying that there is some sort of formula here for how you interchange what we're currently calling bus protocol variants, and um, that is something that's either dynamically discovered and you reconfigure your system for, or I guess I still feel like you need a term for the grouping. Because right now we have one term that says what a bus protocol looks like, right? And we call it a variant. Again, maybe not the best term, but we have one term that says this is what my specific version of the bus protocol looks like. And then we have another term says this is my grouping of the specific bus protocols that I'm using, right? So you have protocols and groups. Maybe that's a better name, whatever. But I don't see how we would obviate either one of those two terms. And you could define a system that makes this dynamic, though. I mean, you could have some sort of cap system where it goes, okay, let's agree on primary data transport. Do you require cache coherence? Yada, 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 right? But that would make the controller way more complicated. And I don't think we have any desire to do that. Well, at least I don't. But I don't. The general feeling is I don't. I feel like to keep it simple um, is probably more people's driving motivation for this stuff.
Mhm.
And I think you probably could define an interface profile that did that, though. Uh, it would need more. It would need more. It would need some sort of more definition on top of that. So you could have a profile that has like AXI, chai, and a couple of other things, and then does some sort of capability bits in order to determine which one is being used. But you still have to have all of those, right? You still have to have the capability of muxing them in case whichever ones are selected. But again, that would be, if people are interested in that, that would be an interesting exercise to go through and just define a way of doing that. But I think that is a different topic than what we're discussing now. So let's get back to the terminology. Do you not agree that we need two terms here?
And the two terms you're talking about is, a protocol variant and then the mix of or grouping.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And again, maybe we don't, well, again, we argued about this a lot when we did it too the first time. But I think we weren't really definitely weren't thinking about it with a marketing mindset or
Or a longer term focus, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I definitely agree that maybe there's a better term here that could be used that makes this less confusing. I mean, we could just call these, well, no. I say if we call them bus protocols, again, if you don't have the word the whole point of the word variant, and I think David was the one that came up with this name. The whole reason that was added on was because it's not just one, right? It's potentially like half a dozen in each document, right? Different bus widths and stuff like that. We talk about how the packet looks different. And so because you potentially could have different ones in the same spec, you'll have, AXI stream 64, AXI stream 128, AXI stream 512, whatever. I don't remember the numbers specifically because the AXI stream's got weird data sizes. But you might get either one of those in there. So just to make it clear that you need to pick a name, you need to pick the specific variant. It was called variant. But again, maybe that's again an easier education thing rather than part of the naming. So again, we can call these protocol packet specifications or I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the other one first. Is there a better name than interface profile? Is that not clear?
An interface profile is a mix of protocols.
Yes.
Protocol.
The whole point of the interface profile is if vendor A and vendor B both say the same interface profile name,
Mhm.
then at least from a wire transport point of view, they're compatible. But to the best of this, to the best of this spec's ability, right? There's obviously other areas they need to sync on, but at least from this point of view, if you say I am standardized, I don't know, do we even have a name for the profile in here? Whoops.
I mean, what that is specifying is a specific mix of protocol mappings, right?
Yes.
You
So
have to
Chai plus AXI Lite, right? But there's a name to it, and it also has like I said, some credit
yeah,
path shortcuts and things like that.
but ultimately it also has to map all the way down into, the profile and the variants
Yes.
somehow.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the simplest version of this would be a list of bus protocol variants. Like I'm going to use
Mhm.
this version of AXI, this version of AXI stream, this version of whatever, AAPB. And then it will also provide any additional information that you need in terms of IDs, right? Because the IDs do have to be established there in order to not collide. And then, like I said, occasionally some of them will have, like the Ventana one did, if I remember correctly, had some special handling for lower latency packet exchanges because you're only using those two. And so you could do a couple of cool tricks and stuff like that. I can't remember how many of these made in the spec, and it's been a while since I've read that part. So, but you can do kind of whatever you want on top of those things, right? If you need to define special behaviors or values. And so from a wire in, wire out point of view on the link layer, the theory is that that gives you all the information in order to be compatible. So yeah, so the interface profiles, I think, was the original name. Again, David had, and then we found a gap there for doing the other buses, and that's why, bus protocol variant was added.
Yeah, I don't know if the name is all that significant or important, because when you talk about taking different protocols and variants, or maybe call it parameters of those profiles, it becomes very specialized, right? It's almost like it's tied to a product definition.
Yeah, I mean, well, that was the goal. I mean, the goal, but that was part of the point, I think. So this, again, I think the prime, again, we can define new things if we have new scopes. But I think one of the points that is made in the spec, and the points that David made in our conversation, was that this spec was written with SOC disaggregation. I always want to say something else. It was disambiguity or whatever. So yeah, disaggregation. And so the point is, you've got a subsystem in your chip. You want to move that to a chiplet. Let's draw a perimeter, and I want to get all those wires across the link, right? And so you have a set perimeter, and I have a mechanism in the specification to now re-encapsulate that as a transport layer. Now we can take that same definition, publish that as a standard, and if other people follow that, they can hook to the exact same port. That said, it doesn't satisfy like the same niche that, say, UCIe does, right? Where it has all these layers of, PCIe and stuff like that, discoverability and stuff like that, right? This stuff definitely works for things if you're doing AXI stream, right? Or if you're trying to get a lot of if you're trying to get a variety of data across an existing like FLIT interface, right? Which again, that's the helpful part for the other FLIT format we're talking about, right? In both of those cases, this works, right? But it doesn't add another layer of standardization there where it solves your go-to-market problems necessarily, right? You do have to like communicate this interface profile to people pre-silicon, and they have to bake it in. You potentially could make an interface profile that had a lot more flexibility to it, that had a lot more buses to it that you can then break apart, that people could be a little more flexible, right? Where they built a device to an interface profile that was not the one that you supported necessarily. You could potentially build an interface profile that then reconfigured your controller to meet theirs in some ways. You'd have to like scope out those variables and stuff. But again, that requires potentially another layer of communication over what we have defined here, another layer of sideband or whatever. And it also requires a level of flexibility that we haven't built in, because we're assuming, I think, like IDs and stuff like that are fixed. But those definitely could be programmable and discoverable, and you could potentially like swap between a number of bus protocol variants and rebuild your interface, with a more complicated controller. I think that's totally possible, but it would be really, we'd have to talk about like what your real scope of that is, right? Because right now, the way people are building these things, like the mapping is just totally whatever they want over, say, a normal BOW interface or whatever, right? If they're not following one of our bus protocol variants, then it's just kind of out in the wind, right? So you need to be able to shift or swizzle all of those bits into the right buckets before doing your packet reconstruction, or not record, but bus reconstruction from the packet, right? And so that right now, that's not. I mean, it would be interesting problem to solve, right? But that's even more different. So I think that we have the tools to build a more complicated standard on top of what we have, but that is not a problem that we're solving right now.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we can get to a point of a protocol mapping where it's prioritized, where you break down that bus or that protocol into subsections and you prioritize the sections that, or the subsets that have higher probability of being used. And then maybe, like you've got some kind of parameter that says, hey, I'm using this subset of the protocol, right?
Mhm.
Um, and maybe that's a way that we get more interoperability here. Because my concern is if we don't do that, and so I guess it's the protocol mapping that seems to be the most important here. And defining it in such a way that maybe we get better composability of
I
these.
mean, the
Yeah.
other way of dealing with this is define a standardized interface profile that can get anything across a link, right? That is the most efficient. And then both sides just make bus gaskets. You know what I mean? Because I mean, we're getting the same things across this link. The whole point of all of this, though, is really just so you don't have to it is completely transparent to the system, right? And so if you're going to go through all of these hurdles in trying to do individual bus protocol, an array of bus protocols and stuff like that, it does make you kind of rethink, well, what's my real goal here? My real goal here is to get a type of data across the link, right? And that type of data has to marry to my system with some sort of um, protocol conversion or glue logic or whatever, right? So if I'm trying to become an amorphous, take anything kind of interface, does it really make sense to meet all of those bus protocols on the hub side? Or can I just interpret these protocols no matter what I get as the correct way that they're intentioned and do a protocol conversion to my native bus interface, right? So instead of what you're saying, you know, like I think what you're talking about, Jeff, again, um is being able to map, anything to anything. I think it's probably easier to be able to map anything to a very specific thing, if that makes sense.
Well, I think what I'm suggesting is the protocol mapping. Um, you break that up into different packets, right? Which we do.
Yep.
And then you prioritize those. You try to prioritize the signals that you pack in each one of those packets, such that you get,
What do you mean by prioritize?
meaning the main functionality. Let's say you have a DAT channel, right? And it's 256-bit DAT channel.
Okay.
You everybody maybe wants that, right? In the community. And so you make sure that that gets sent first across the link for that protocol mapping.
Okay.
And then somebody else who wants to go to 512-bit or something, they don't bear the cost, right, of having to transmit those extra packets. And then it's a configuration on either side, right? Of, oh, I'm taking this subset of the protocol mappings.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
Kind of.
I mean,
Again,
if
this basically you're like, like almost like a cat bit scenario. I have and some sort of capabilities that I'm doing a request. Like um I need memory access. These are my wish lists, right? And what can you give me to do this? And you're like, okay, well, if you want coherent, it's going to be, chai 256 or whatever, right? And the other side will go, okay, I support that. Let's do that. I
Yeah, and the complexity I think is on if we think about this as spoke and hub, the complexity is on the hub side, right? Supporting a superset. And the spoke is going to have a more defined set that it's communicating.
Yeah, again, I hesitate to say that that is the, on a per bus level. I guess if you're dealing with just like one or two buses, then that's probably not a big deal. I think would, I'd still point people to say, why don't you just communicate a profile name? Here's a list of profiles that, like the hub, because it has the most. Well, no, I take that back. Well, I don't know. I guess there's arguments both ways, but either way, you basically advertise a list of interface profiles. You guys agree to an interface profile, and then that's the one that you both configure on your sides. Maybe the spoke only has one, right? So it's only doing chai plus AXI light or whatever, right? And the hub goes, okay, I'll reconfigure to that. But again, I don't. Do we need to really build more? This is almost not even it's not all, it's almost just a discovery question, right? It's not even a technical hurdle on this side, right?
No, but
But,
I think what you get to is potentially, I just have to describe the protocol mappings, right? And then there's
but
some,
that's what a profile is.
but you don't have to, let's say, you don't have to document every interface specification. Because I don't know how much commonality there's going to be there.
But you have to know that. So I see I guess I get what you're kind of saying. You could give like for instance, for AXI, you could give all of the different possible option widths for the bit fields, right? And you could go through and agree to those in terms of cap bits and things like that, right? So then the packet gets communicated across the link. We throw those bits in the right buckets, right? And then, and then you fill in or whatever your MSBs or whatever. But I, I don't I don't know.
I
Yeah,
guess I was trying to get to is, can we get to just a protocol mapping per, protocol AXI or chai? And then you kind of define all your packets within those protocols. You try to order those in an order that is going to capture, as many cases as possible. You prioritize those as being your higher priority, that it's likely going to transmit across the link, and then you go to the least likely, right? And then if you want to have this capability, right, of I want to get more performance on the link or more efficiency on the link, and so therefore I'm going to cut out some of those packets use, then you could potentially do that. But you don't necessarily have to do that.
I mean, the bus protocol variants are what you're describing. They're
Yeah.
just set stakes in the ground for each of those different pieces. You're talking about something even more flexible where it is instead of a name, it is, like I said, it's a set of capabilities that describes the thing. I don't know.
Instead of bus
That's
variant.
totally possible. I think that is very complicated though, I think,
Yeah.
both in terms of the specification and the implementation. I think. I think it's possible though. I mean, like I said, but I think the answer still stays the same. I don't think that's what we have here. I think it would be a new spec, or it'd be a new addendum spec or something like that that describes that. Uh, and I'm not.
I think that, like the XE5 interface profile, let's say, I think that's the bus variant or the protocol mapping, right, that we're talking about.
The
And
bus protocol variant right now that's not in a profile, I don't think. That's another problem. We just kind of stopped. We didn't define any other profiles. There's just one. I think it's chai plus AXA light. And I can't remember if it's in this
I'm
document.
looking at the names, the file names, ones, like Axie5 interface profile. And there's Axie5 Lite, D32
Oh,
interface profile. So
okay.
that's
Never
what I'm
mind. Maybe we
looking
did.
at. And then you have the Chai-E, bus protocol, which would be our side of things. I think we probably
Yeah.
included that. And then you've got, a V1 interface profile, which is the protocol mixing that we're talking about. Right? That's, I guess, truly an interface protocol. Maybe these others shouldn't have been named interface protocol or profile. They should have been a bus protocol variant.
I gotta go find them. Why they're not on the drive. All right, I'll look at them later. Yeah, again, I don't remember.
Okay.
But either way, I think your goal there is something different than what these are trying to accomplish. I don't know if everybody's going to want to make something that is as flexible as what you're talking about. You know what I mean?
Maybe. I think you kind of have the flexibility a little bit, right? Because you've got the Chai-E bus protocol, and then you have, the V1 interface profile that's just referring to that. And it's going to refer probably, I don't know if it also refers to, because I don't see I guess it's the
As an
X5.
let's just take this as an exercise. So like so you have an existing bus protocol variant right now, and let's say you keep all of the bit orders the same, right? Where the only thing that you're changing in the bus protocol variant is the width of the individual subchannels, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so again, you could just assign a number that is literally just the width to each of those and call that the cap bits or whatever that we're talking about here. But if you go over granule boundaries and stuff like that, you start losing, you potentially have totally different performance, right? And so not totally different, but you potentially end up, depending on the bus widths and stuff like that, a non-trivial amount of bandwidth waste. And so that's the reason a lot of the bus protocol variants are defined the way they were. They were the best, as we decided, the best trade-off of features versus bandwidth. And we tried to give a number of potential options in terms of feature groupings.
Right. And I think that's what I'm describing, right? We looked at all the different features within those profiles, those bus protocols or protocols.
Yes.
We looked at that feature set and we said, okay, these are going to be the first that we transmit across the link. And then the ones that maybe are not included in those protocol specs, we don't want to kind of support that, right? On the active link.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I guess
So
what I'm
I guess
saying is, can we create a superset for Chai, let's say? We write those
definitely did.
features, we have all those features, right? And then I guess the concern that you're having is, how do I specify what subset of that am I using, right?
Right. So the bus protocol, all the bus protocol variants that I remember, and again, I haven't looked back at the spec in a while. I think they all had a kitchen sink option, right? That had all the features. Now there was potentially that you really needed some more, I don't know, again, like user bits or something like that just aren't covered. But other than like weird cases like that, there's not, there was an option to use almost every single feature in all of them as terms of one of the bus protocol variants, and there was other bus protocol variants that made trade-offs of those features that we decided that made sense for different market segments, and tried to make them as bandwidth efficient as possible with those features. Now, again, someone could define something different and make a new bus protocol variant. And I totally understand, if you wanted to make a controller that could potentially map to new bus protocol variants that aren't defined, but I'm still not finding from a market point of view, what the impulse here is for us to standardize that, right? I think it still makes more sense for us to say, hey, pick one of these that makes most sense for your application, and then tell the other side that's what it is. And if you need discovery, it should be at like at a name point of view, like we're doing bus protocol variant X, right? Kitchen sink or whatever. And the other side goes, okay, I can support X, let's do X, right? Rather than having to give you every single field, right? Because then you have what, like 5 buckets for a protocol that you can do your muxing with, right? With the bus protocol variant names, versus if you have to do everything, then like that. I mean, there are some limit. Depends on what the maximum widths of these things are, right? But you could end up with, like, I mean, at your work, what your best case is you end up with some muxes that overlap or whatever, and you have a complicated muxing system there. Your worst case is you can't deal with that at all, and you have to like scan them into buckets or whatever, right? And so you have to have a whole nother high-speed clock dealing with this stuff. So there's definitely some controller implementation issues that that people would break some things, right? If you had the buckets just of arbitrary size.
No, but I think that's kind of why, if we can, in a community setting, talk about how you're prioritizing these features.
Oh, what decisions we made when we did the bus protocol variants?
Yeah, and so like if we just had one spec for, chai mapping, and then in it, you talk about all these features, how they get kind of mapped to different, packets.
Do
And
we?
then
Oh, yeah.
and
We had those discussions. I don't know if we documented them all, because I
yeah,
have a huge spreadsheet that
yes.
asks individual questions about each field, and we went through and talked about them, like why would we do this versus this.
Yeah,
Some of them were arbitrary.
that's important. That's the important aspect, because what you start doing is creating these subsets that have a high probability of interoperability.
Yeah. So I think we already did that. And I think we already, if we need more documentation about why we made certain field choices, then we definitely can talk about that. I think the question is whether we need anything from a technical point of view here. Do we
Yeah,
need
I
more
guess if you
features?
pack it all into one spec, like the chai, and then you just you talk about different variants within that spec, then you have less specs for people to go through, less duplication going on, right? And then maybe we can
Well,
talk about this as protocol mappings, and then
do we not have that? I mean, we have the interface profiles. There was a bit of a munge between the
maybe I don't know.
Yeah, so like I can't remember where I put the specs. I had to go find them again. But anyway, if I remember correctly, like AXI and AXI Stream, they had each like 3 or 4 bus protocol variants that were based on features and bus widths, right? About like if you're going to do this, then this is what we think is the best trade-off in terms of feature and feature widths and stuff like that. And this is how we would pack it, right? And if there were leftover bits in the granules, we assign those to some of the virtual channels or whatever, right? So that you could still get some more functionality. And those varied a little bit different to ones, but how much padding we had and stuff like that. So we made a lot of like, we as a group, we made a bunch of trade-offs, but we didn't like, make these the standard that people had to follow, because that was kind of against the point at the time, right? It was against, this is all about how can you cut an SSC. And so these are all kind of like just whatever we felt like would be good, and people can follow these, or they can just go make their own bus protocol variant and then communicate these. This is all supposed to be, it's all supposed to be language that people talk with, right? Rather than, demand from on high. But if we're going to do demands from on high, right, again, some of these decisions could get rethought and stuff.
I don't see them as demands from on high, but it's a community effort to go figure out how the features should be prioritized. And
Yeah. So again, I think
then-
we have that done. We have a bus protocol variants. People can use those to make new discussions and start a new conversation if those are inadequate. But I think,
yeah.
again, back to the original point, number one, do we need to call them something different? Maybe that name doesn't work. And number two, to
Yeah.
your earlier point, is that mechanism sufficient, or do we need something even more flexible than what we've already defined?
Yeah, I guess what I'm questioning is if we actually need, let's say, an interface profile, we need to define that. Or is that,
So
a product definition where I just say, hey, I'm using this, this, and this,
you could potentially get away without it if you had a discovery mechanism,
yeah,
right? Then you potentially get away without having that. But the problem is the way we've defined interface profiles is that's also the place you put exceptions. So again, with Vitana's case, right? You guys have interface profiles. I don't know if you publish which ones you published, but you have ones that do things differently. And
yeah.
you have shortcuts and stuff like that for low latency. And if you're ever going to publish those secret sauce things in order for somebody else to manage up with those, that's where you would put those things.
Well,
Now,
yeah, and that's what I'm concerned about is the exceptions, because what it means is then it's a difficult attachment.
correct.
Right?
I mean, not
So,
difficult. They're optimizations, right? And so
Yeah.
you don't have to follow the optimizations, and maybe there's a different profile. Maybe you support two profiles, one with the optimization and one without the optimization. Again, you negotiate that.
Yeah.
but yeah, having those discussions in the community, I think, is really important because,
Okay.
maybe it's not worth it to have these exceptions in the interface profiles. And then the
Maybe.
interface profiles really become,
The
what,
profiles also establish like the what was it, the IDs and stuff like that, or the number of virtual wires and yada yada. So
yeah, and I'm not sure if, let's say, the IDs have to be hardwired, right? They could also be dynamically assigned. We have to go
yes,
figure that out, but at least that way, then maybe we don't have to predefine them in a static way so that we understand all combinations.
that's
Right?
possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, I don't. I don't. I think the unfortunate part here is that the people on this call are currently the community, quote unquote.
Yes. I
So
know.
so I don't know if this is a problem that we would solve in the scope of what we're talking about for this version of the spec. If this version of the spec gets more people excited, I think then we can potentially add more stuff. But I don't think we're changing that this time. I think the best we can do is if there's a way to make this more clear and more clear in terms of what the discussion is going forward, then I think that that's something we could do by adding verbiage to that effect.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe we just have a simple name of, let's say, protocol mapping or something like that, right?
I mean, you could add a new protocol here, or no, not protocol. You could have a new, I would say a new profile and call it like a dynamic profile, right? And then basically define the scope in which things will be negotiated in that dynamic profile. If that makes
Well,
sense.
I guess what I'm saying is what I think is really important is, the bus variant mappings, right?
Yeah, yes, sure.
That's maybe the term that we're using, and then we see later on if we have to define this interface profile. Right, if it
Okay.
actually needs a name or if there's some other mechanism we can use to just create the mixing between the protocol mappings.
Right. But like I said, I think you need a new level of specification in order to define a dynamic mixing or
Yeah,
discoverability.
yeah, it's just for me like the profile and variance is just it's confusing. I just don't think they're very descriptive terms. And the main
I don't disagree with you. I
and the
just don't
main
have I
thing I
just don't
think
have a better
people are
name.
interested in is how do I map an AMBA protocol to, to this link, right?
Right. Yeah.
So that's, for me, that's the big term that we should be marketing or we should be capturing in a specification. And the rest of this is, yeah, maybe we need to define it down the road or, you know.
I
Yeah,
mean, I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah.
Let me think about it. Maybe
Yeah.
there's like a whole another section we can add to this that talks about, you know, what steps a user would do in order to utilize these things.
Yeah. Yeah. And let me
Okay.
review the specifications because, I want to go review those again and see how we define variants and. all this kind of stuff. So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Good
Yeah.
talk, guys.
Yeah, I think it was a good discussion. I think we lost most of everybody except Ben.
It's amazing how we can turn meetings with very little agenda into something that lasts over an hour.
Yeah, well, this is a very difficult topic to sort out, right? I think,
yeah, it is.
but
Okay.
it's a good discussion. Okay.
Yeah. Hey, yeah, keep me in the loop if you get any words from your side on
Will do.
the Ventana stuff, and then we can kind of pick up this discussion next week.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Talk to you guys later. Bye.
Yep.
Bye-bye.